President, I'm standing here tonight to talk about a couple of things. First is the tax legislation that was passed this week in Congress. This is going to help everybody I represent because it's going to help our entire country. It's going to lift up our country in ways that we're already beginning to see. There have been a lot of people to thank, and today I was at the signing ceremony where Speaker Ryan and President Pro Tem Orrin Hatch signed the official legislation that is now on its way to the President for his signature. I want to start by thanking them, Speaker Ryan, Chairman Hatch, and also Chairman Brady of the Ways and Means Committee, with whom I worked closely on this. And he was a gentleman. He was, as always, someone who was looking for ways to solve problems and to get to yes, and I commend him for that. I also want to thank some of the colleagues on the Finance Committee who I worked closely with, this Core 4 group, including Senator John Thune, Senator Pat Toomey, Senator Tim Scott, and then maybe most importantly is the staff. We had an enormous undertaking here, and it was ambitious to try to meet the goals that were set out early on of real middle-class tax cuts and also energizing the economy through helping small businesses and then changing the whole international system so we could level the playing field. There's a lot to do, and it took a lot of expertise, a lot of time and effort. So to Mark Prater, Jay Khosla, Brendan Dunn, who led that effort, we all owe you our thanks. And then, of course, a slew of other staff, including Zach Rudisil of my staff, who just spent hours and hours and put his heart and soul into this. Thank you, all of you, for helping us to get to this point. You know, for years, Mr. President, Democrats and Republicans alike have called for middle-class tax cuts. We talk about it in campaigns. I'm proud to say that this week we delivered on it. And I know some of my Democratic colleagues have been critical of the legislation, and some have said, well, these are not real middle-class tax cuts because they expire. Yes, they expire after 8 years. We wish they didn't. That's the rules, the budget rules here. But that's the same thing that happened with the 2001 tax cuts, the 2003 tax cuts, and Congress worked to extend those using the same budget rules for about 95% of those taxpayers. And I'm strongly hoping that we will do the same thing, and I believe we will. But this is real tax relief. And for families in Ohio, median income, the average will be just over $2,000 every year. That helps the family budget. That's a little money you can put aside for retirement. Maybe that's money to use for a vacation you didn't have. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, which is true with a lot of people I represent, that's a big help. It's a big help. And that's from doubling the child credit. That's from doubling the standard deduction, essentially creating $14,000 of a zero income bracket. And by the way, doing those sorts of things in this bill means that about 3 million Americans or more are going to be leaving the tax rolls altogether. These are people who have tax liability now, and under the new bill, starting in a couple weeks, they will not have an income tax liability. They'll be out from under the IRS. And they'll be able, as they move, many of them from welfare to work or from a federal program into gainful employment, not to worry about the tax man. That's really important too. So I am proud of the legislation because I think it's going to really help the people I represent in an immediate way. And people will see it in their paychecks. The proof's in the paychecks because they'll see it probably starting in February. The withholding will change. The IRS has to go through a process on that. I wrote a letter to them yesterday encouraging them to move on that quickly because people want to see that in their paychecks. So the tax relief starts in a couple weeks, January 1st. It'll be in the paychecks when the withholding changes, hopefully sometime late January, February. And people will see less money being withheld from their paycheck because of the tax cuts that enable them to have a healthier family budget. But I got to tell you, Mr. President, I believe that this is going to go well beyond that for the people I represent. As important as those middle-class tax cuts are, equally as important is what we're doing to stimulate more investment in this economy. And that's through the changes for small businesses who will now be able to put more money into the business rather than paying more taxes. Many of these businesses, so-called pass-through companies, which is most of the businesses in America, they pay taxes as individuals. They don't pay the business tax rate, they pay the individual tax rate. And many of them do take a dividend. They take money out of the company every year for one purpose, and that's to pay their taxes. And to the extent they're not taking the money out as much to pay those taxes because of the changes we made here for small businesses, they're going to be able to invest more in their people, more in their equipment, more in their plants, and I'm hearing this from small business people around the state of Ohio. Last weekend, I was with a number of them, and they're excited about this because they want to be able to invest more in their business. They want to be able to invest more in their people. They want to be able to give people who work for them the opportunity to have a higher wage. Right now, wages are flat, really have been for the past couple decades when you take inflation into account. This has the incredible opportunity for us not just to provide middle-class tax cuts, which are important, not just to help businesses invest, but actually to help get wages up so that people will see that if they work hard and play by the rules, they are going to see higher wages, the ability to get ahead, and have more hope for themselves and for their kids and their grandkids. Everyone, regardless of economic status, region, or party, is going to see the benefits of this tax reform bill. By the way, some workers are already seeing the benefit as we talk today, because there are a bunch of companies that announced today that because of the tax reform and tax cut legislation, they are already taking steps to increase the pay of their employees, increase benefits, or invest more money in building plant equipment or adding more jobs through investment, or both. These companies include some big companies you've heard of, like Comcast. It includes other companies like Wells Fargo and Boeing and AT&T. They've made these announcements today. One company that announced it today is in my hometown. It's the Fifth Third Bank. Kind of an unusual name, Fifth Third, but that makes them distinctive, right? But they said today, you know what, we're going to start paying our people a higher entry-level pay. Instead of 13-something an hour, it's going to be 15 bucks an hour. And we're going to provide bonuses to other employees who are not affected by that. And they're going to do it right now, and they're doing it because of the tax relief legislation. So to those who say, gosh, what about me? I would just say, look at your paycheck. And if you work for one of these businesses that's already made an announcement, of course, you're feeling good about it. But even if you work for another company that maybe is a little quieter about what they're doing, maybe they're not going to make a big announcement, trust me, it's going to be in their interest now in a competitive market out there to invest in those companies, to invest in their people, to invest in training, to invest in better equipment, better technology. And those are the sorts of things that over time, Mr. President, are going to make the biggest difference, I think, in this tax bill. If you look at what's happening in our economy today, the reason wages are flat, and by the way, expenses are not flat. Expenses are up and wages are flat. That's called the middle class squeeze, and that's very real. What's the biggest expense for most people? It's health care. The way to deal with that is to get this economy moving, and specifically to increase the productivity. That's what the economists say, is that our productivity is low right now. And when you have low productivity, you have low economic growth. And that's what we've had, under 2% economic growth. That's not the America I grew up in. That's not the America I want my kids to grow up in. But by making these investments in better technology, in better equipment, in better training, what happens? You get more productivity. You get higher efficiency. You get the opportunity to increase your business and therefore hire more people. And that's something I think over time will play out and will create the opportunity to lift up everybody. John F. Kennedy, who was a Democrat, but had a lot of things to say that sound more like what Republicans are talking about today. And one was, he said that a rising tide lifts all ships. A rising tide. A rising tide. In the 1960s, he did cut capital gains, by the way, and that tax cut actually generated more economic activity. Ronald Reagan in 1986 actually put in place tax reform with a bipartisan group here in the United States Congress that ended up with strong economic growth in the 1980s and the 1990s. But that was 31 years ago, and that's the last time we made these kinds of substantive, comprehensive changes in the tax code. It's past time to do it again. The final thing I'll say about the tax reform proposal is that when you talk to businesses that are competing globally, which is more and more companies, including a lot of smaller companies now, the global economy is upon us. For people who said, gosh, I wonder when the economy is going to affect me globally. Well, it does. It affects all of us, because in your town, wherever it is, in your business, wherever you work, you're probably competing directly or indirectly on a global basis. I'll give you an example. There's a little company in my hometown called Standard Textile. It's a great company. They They make linens. And it's a company that competes every day globally. And in fact, a lot of the companies they compete with, as you can imagine, are companies that make these linens somewhere else, say in Asia, where traditionally people have been able to find lower costs. Well, guess what they're looking at now with this tax reform bill? The ability to invest more here in America. American workers, American-made linens. And they tell me, as do other companies, that this is going to give them a better competitive situation, because no longer are you going to have a tax code that has the highest business rate in the entire industrialized world, and an international system that says if you keep your money overseas rather than bringing it back, when you earn money, you can save on your taxes. That's what's resulted in $2.5 to $3 trillion being locked out of America and being kept overseas. This tax reform proposal unlocks that, allows us to bring that money back. People call it repatriation. I guess that's accurate, repatriation. I wish it had never been unpatriated in the first place. Because if you're a patriot, you should want that money to be spent here in America. And that's what's going to happen with this tax reform proposal. So it is about the tax cuts for working families, hardworking families who deserve it, who are now stuck in a situation where it's tough to get ahead. This will help immediately. It is about helping small businesses and other companies here in America to be able to invest more, being able to write off equipment when they buy it right away, as an example, having a lower rate. But it's also about leveling that playing field and saying that America, once again, is going to reposition itself as the leader in the world. Once again, be that beacon of opportunity that other countries look to say, you know, we'd like to be like that, a free market economy where people who work hard and play by the rules can get ahead. You can't say that now with our current tax code, because workers literally are competing on an unlevel playing field with one hand tied behind their back because of our tax code. Because of our tax code. 3 times as many American companies were purchased by foreign companies last year as the other way around. 4,700 U.S. companies became foreign companies over the last decade or so because of our tax code. That's based on an Ernst & Young study that came out recently that said if this tax reform proposal that we have now passed had been in place, those 4,700 companies would still be American companies. All of us are patriots here in this body. All of us should want to bring back those jobs to America, repatriate those profits here to America, give American workers the ability to compete on a level playing field. And I know there were some differences in this legislation. We've heard a lot of it from the other side of the aisle. But on this issue, it's been bipartisan in the past, and I hope it will be bipartisan going forward to hold these reforms in place so that we can show that we have confidence and faith in American workers. We have confidence that if we give them the right tools, in this case, the right tax code to work with, they can compete and they can win. I think we're going to see that. And I think, again, with the hopeful signs we've seen even today of companies providing better pay or benefits or making additional commitments on investments, even well beyond that, we're going to see, maybe quietly, and maybe spread out all over the country in ways that won't be as obvious, decisions that are going to be made, business budgets that are going to change as a result of this tax reform bill. I'm hearing it from small businesses. I'm hearing it from the bigger companies that compete directly globally. And I'm certainly hearing it from families who are happy to see a little tax break to be able to help them as we go into the holidays. Mr. President, that's all good news. And I think passing that legislation is really going to help the people I represent.